Hello, Julie. This is Michael Gall from Internet Business Solutions. You requested a review of your website from a search engine optimization standpoint. So I'm going to go through a couple quick things and give you an idea of where you stand from the way Google looks at and interprets your site. So first off, the size of the screen right now is the most common desktop size across all computers surfing websites right this moment. It's the latest November 2019 stats showing this. So this is the way most people who come from a computer, which in a lot of cases I think will cover your employer side. The career seeker, you'd have to look at your analytics stats, but I feel that career seekers may look more from a mobile. Employers will look statistically more from a desktop, but this is the way the desktop people will come to your site first. And a couple things to point out in SEO or the way Google reads your website, they look at three key factors first. The first is the URL, the second is the title, and the third is the first heading tag. And the heading is a piece of code that goes around your strongest headline, and it's marked up in a certain way for Google to understand that this is where your most important keywords live. So on a homepage, the URL, there's not many options. That's more for internal pages of the site. So on a homepage, we'll disregard the number one. Number two would be the title. So your title is Jobs in Minnesota, Career Resources as one word, and then CareerForceMinnesota.com. So jobs in Minnesota looks to be the number one search term that you're going after based on the way the site's set up. Normally, you would have a heading to the page that would reiterate that same search phrase. So at the moment, there's no, in the opening screen area, there's no jobs in Minnesota keywords, number one. Number two, your slideshow here looks to be 100% graphic. And when that's the case, Google doesn't read graphic. So these words are invisible to Google, the words that are on the slides. So, and Google also identifies the top two sections here as a menu. So really the only words on the page are how can CareerForce help you in the top section. And the reason that's important to point out is that Google ultimately is a robot. And the robot comes and reads your page and can learn what your content is about through the words that are on the page. If your words are in a graphic and if your words are in the menu, you basically are invisible to Google. So there's not a lot of content in this section of the page, which is the highest priority section, to teach Google what your website is about. If I scroll down a little further, we have a search bar here. Google's probably going to ignore this section, knowing that it's a search area. Upcoming events, it's going to know that these are dynamic and date-based. So again, it's going to ignore those as well. And then it's going to come down here to the recent blogs and recent news, and it kind of treats this as a footer. So overall, your site is lacking main content. The more words you have on the page, usually the better. We typically shoot to have about 1,200 words on a homepage, but it's different for every industry and every situation. But regardless, we can clearly see that you have a deficiency of words that are on the page and the proper elements in place to teach Google what you're about. So that's number one. Number two, you are focusing on this term here, jobs in Minnesota, based on your title, and that's the location of where your strongest keyword would be. So I'm going to use that as what the focus is for your SEO strategy. After you review this, if we're misguided on that, feel free to let us know and we can discuss some other options on how you can change to the right phrase. But based on the way the page is set up now, Google's going to interpret you for jobs in Minnesota, number one. So if I do a search for jobs in Minnesota, I'll come here and see Simply Hired, Minnesota Works. As I go through the page, you guys currently do not rank on page one. If I go to page two, you are not on page 2 either. And if I go to page 3, I'm not seeing your site there. So at the moment, you're not giving Google enough clues and signals to identify your site as quality content and a premium choice to show people who are searching for jobs in Minnesota. And the way you improve that is through doing SEO work on the site itself. That's step 1. And step 2 is to build the proper links and the proper offsite structure pointing to your homepage and to your website that do give the right signals to Google. So that's something that we would help you with. We can help you with. If we do an analysis of the page, this here shows us all of the keywords that are on the page and how many times they're being used. We'll see here Career Force is being used 17 times, Career is 27 times. That is a little high. If you see the density here, it shows us how many words are on the page total right now. And the frequency of your terms is kind of high. General rule of thumb is to keep it around 1.5%. You're at 3.29 and 2.07. And what this does is this can often create a over-optimization signal to Google. And as a result, they will not rank you because they feel that you may be pushing too hard for these words. So we can see here that there's some wording changes. Not only do you need to dilute those words a little by adding more content to the page, you may be over-optimizing at the moment by having that too many times. So that's one of the first things we look at. Next thing we look at is we have a tool here that Google provides for their advertising platform. And one of the features of it is that we can put in your URL and it shows us the words that Google feels it has identified, the keyword phrases it's identified for your site. And then it sorts them in order of relevance. You can see here the arrow here is on order of relevance. So the number one term this Google picks up for your site is Minnesota Job Center, then Minnesota Workforce Center Jobs, and so on. You can see that these main phrases are not getting a lot of monthly search volume, 50, 90, 20. This particular one does peak very nicely at 2,900. But then we go 700 and then back to 70s, 30s, and so on. So if I look at a lot of these, they're very focused on around your brand, which is great. I think where you can use the most improvement is getting some of these more generic phrases like St. Paul jobs and Twin City jobs or job search sites in Minnesota. These are pretty far down the list. We would want to teach Google more about those phrases and as they pertain to your site so that you can rank higher for those phrases. For instance, if we do a search for jobs near Minnesota, okay, we have Indeed, Monster, Minnesota Gov, Minnesota Jobs, Career Builder, Glassdoor. At the moment, that search is dominated by some big sites. What we would need to do is come in and establish more authority and relevancy between some of the more popular search phrases and teach Google that you should be the correct search for these. If I sort these by the number of searches, we can see Minnesota Jobs gets 9,900, Workforce Center gets 9,900, Minnesota City Jobs, St. Paul Jobs, Minnesota Government Careers. These are the high volume keywords, and at the moment, they're not very high on the relevancy list. So what we would like to see is some work done to your site, both on the site and links pointing to the site that build up your importance for these broader, more popular searches in order to get you more traffic. So that's where we would recommend you spend the most amount of time is teaching Google that. Beyond the words on the page and the links coming in, one of the areas that Google looks at your site is how it performs from a technical and speed standpoint. And here's a tool called gtmetrics.com. If you go to gtmetrics.com, you can put in your URL, and you'll see here that at the moment it's scoring you a D. And the reason it's scoring a D is that it's saying you're not optimized for images, have some JavaScript issues, your browser caching is not set up properly, and and some other little things like server resources are from a consistent URL. That being said, your site does load in 3.5 seconds, so that is fantastic. But what we'd like to do is get this a little higher than a D so that Google looks at the technical analysis of your site a little more favorably. We also use a tool called Page Speed Insights, and this is a Google tool, and this evaluates your mobile and your desktop version of your site. On this tool, you're scoring a 71, which is in a decent range. We generally like to see it be 80 or higher. 71 isn't bad, but you definitely have some room for improvement if you fix some of the things from the previous screen. And this is the mobile version of your website. If I look at the desktop, your desktop version scores a little higher at 83. That's a great score. The final thing I want to point out in this video is that your structure of some of the code of the page is a little counterintuitive for Google. So here's another tool we use. It's called verifyseo.com. And if you come to this tool, put in your URL and put in a phrase like jobs in Minnesota. It says you score 7.3 out of 10. And where we see the biggest problem is in HTML code, there's a concept of a heading. And earlier I said that the number one heading is the most important, or one of the top 3 important pieces of the website. If I look at this list, the number one heading is designated as an H1. Your site starts off with H2s and then goes to H3s. And then I think I might have even seen an H4 in there. Okay, in this case, it's mostly H2s and 3s. There are no H1s. So these are designed to be nested, that you shouldn't have an H2 unless you have an H1. You shouldn't have an H3 unless you have an H2. And they kind of follow like the college outline format. So H1 is the main topic of the page, and then H2 is the subheadings that support that topic. And if there was an H3, it would support the H2. So what this looks like it's taken place is your designer used these H1s, 2s, and 3s as more of a design tool where it makes the fonts smaller and larger and designates them in certain areas instead of using them as they're intended as heading notions. And to give you an idea about this, if we go over to Wikipedia, let's just say I do a search for stock market, Wikipedia. Wikipedia does a perfect job of this. So this word here at the top is a stock market. It's an H1. Okay, it's a heading 1. And if I scroll down the page, size of the markets here, this is an H2. And if I inspect this, you'll see here as I hover over it, it shows that's an H2. So that's the H2 right there. If I come down the page, this topic here is an H2, an H2, an H2. This topic here, trends in market participation, this is an H3. Okay, you can see right here, it's showing H3. Okay, now, the reason I knew these were H2s and H3s is because they follow the outline format. So H1 is the main topic of the page. H2s are all these levels here. And H3 is the indentation, and these would actually be H4s. Okay, and then when you're done on this topic, it goes back to H2s and H3s. When you're done with this topic, it goes back to H2s and H3s. So they should always be in this format, and they should always have an H1 at the top of the page because everything is referencing the topic above it. You see here, this is an H1. So this is a little more technical and a little complicated sounding at first, but I think this chart here illustrates the way it's supposed to be laid out very nicely on Wikipedia, and your website should follow this format. If you notice, Wikipedia, probably in your lifetime of searches, you've probably seen Wikipedia come up more than anything else when you're doing research. Wikipedia has a reputation for having perfect code and perfect on-page SEO, and this is an example of how it should be laid out. And you can see it's very evident on this section here that your site's missing some of these clues, and language and user account menu and main navigation don't teach Google any context about what your site is about. So, hope that wasn't too technical. And my associate Sean is going to be sending this video to you and shooting you an email. If you have any questions or would like to schedule a call to discuss, please feel free to reach out to Sean and myself, and we would love to talk to you some more about how we can help you get your site some more visibility within Google. Thank you.